All right, so move on to the final segment here. I'll be sharing my thoughts on the Vincent Kennedy McMahon Netflix documentary. Now, in this documentary, we've seen 6 episodes cover the wrestling life of Vincent Kennedy McMahon. So, episode 1 was very pivotal for the world of wrestling. I thought it was pretty creative of how Vince learned from his father, of Vince McMahon Sr., at a young age to how to run a wrestling business. Now, Vince was in charge of a lot of landscapes of wrestling at the time and a lot of territories as his father took over the big time territories in wrestling. Now, I thought it was pivotal how Vince learned from his father and had his own say in wanted his own thing in wrestling, and that's mixing pro wrestling with an entertainment standpoint and a storyline standpoint, something that his father really didn't believe in. His father just believed in the wrestling standpoint of it. But Vince wanted storylines and he wanted entertainment in the wrestling. He wanted to bring outside figures like popular stars, movie stars, actresses, pop stars, you name it. And if Vince never did that, what would the landscape of wrestling be today? So that leads us into episode 2, where in episode 2, that's where Vince really started banking on himself, believing in himself, putting a lot of investment into wrestling, making the biggest wrestling show, biggest thing in wrestling, WrestleMania. And you're seeing he put it all on the line to make WrestleMania 2, WrestleMania 3 happen with one of the biggest main events of all time, Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant. And he brought Andre the Giant out of retirement. And we didn't even know if Andre the Giant was going to put over Hulk Hogan or not. I thought that was cool, that the big body slam moment and the leg drop and Hulk Hogan hooking the leg. Not even know if he's going to be over it, but he won the title and the rest is history, or retained the title and the rest is history. But I thought that in the 90s, the steroid allegations was pretty big. They were trying to get Vince's name in the dirt by saying Vince was basically admitting to wrestlers, basically telling wrestlers to take steroids to look better, with a better physique and be bigger in the ring. He was obviously guilty for that, but the big icing on the cake for episode 2 was Hulk Hogan asking for his release, going to WCW, and then testifying against Vince in court. So I thought that was pretty big to see. And that started a bad relationship between himself and Vince for many years until they finally buried the hatchet. But then episode 3, that's where you really got how things really got going. The big Monday Night War, the big Monday Night War beef between WWF and WCW. And that was where WCW Ted Turners was pulling out the checkbook for guys like Hulk Hogan, Bret Hart, Macho Man Randy Savage, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and several others to jump ship from WWF to WCW for better money and possibly for a better schedule. And we've seen that, so we had to see the adaptation of how how Vince would adapt to make new stars. And he did that with the likes of Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, The Undertaker, D-Generations X of Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Chyna, Mankind as well, and several others that played a factor in the Attitude Era. So I thought that was pretty cool to see that unfold. And let's get into episode 4. I mean, episode 4 was the rise of the Attitude Era. And we've seen that they're in the ratings, they were getting their asses kicked for 83 weeks. And finally, Vince found a formula to defeat his rival and basically take them out of business. Now, towards the end of the episode was pretty crazy. Now, you obviously seen the Montreal Screwjob between Bret Hart and Vince McMahon. But the term events of Vince McMahon and Owen Hart's relationship was well documented in this documentary. With Bret and Owen's relationship not being the same when Bret went to WCW and Owen staying, that Vince basically gave Owen a new direction, a new character, and he was no longer known as a serious pure technical wrestler. He was given comedy character acts, which led to the unfortunate accident in the late 90s of Owen Hart being hung from the Raptors, accidentally falling to his death, hitting his head on the turnbuckle. And obviously I'm young enough that I wasn't watching like live, because I am 25 years of age, but to know that the fact that one of the worst business standpoints were made of Vince continuing the show, knowing that Owen passed away, his blood smeared in the corner of the ring, with the wrestlers having to continue to wrestle that night, is one of the most chaotic things in wrestling history. And I give Jerry the King Lawler and Jim Ross a lot of credit for announcing that to the fans at home on pay-per-view. But if the fans in attendance knew that, I believe it would have been an all-out riot and the show would have truly been boycotted and there would have been hell to pay. But I think that is one of the craziest things in wrestling history. I give the fans I give the competitors a lot of credit in the world for continuing after that. Because, man, that's wild. That is still wild to this day. Episode 5 really led to the McMahons, the storylines of the McMahons really changed it all for wrestling. I mean, you had Vince being involved, Shane McMahon, his son, his daughter Stephanie, his future son-in-law Triple H, which really led to Stephanie and Triple H being married for their storyline that happened. They spent more time together, and a marriage happened. Linda, his wife, and that led to the first ever WrestleMania match between Shane McMahon and Vince McMahon. Now, as it went on, I felt so bad for Shane because he was the prodigal son that Vince never believed in. And Vince took the business over from his father, Vince McMahon Sr. And you would have thought the same would have happened with Shane eventually taking the business from his father, Vince. But I don't believe Vince ever believed in Shane. And Shane actually had the chance to be his own businessman, purchase the UFC years and years ago when the UFC was in financial trouble. So can you imagine that's one of the biggest what ifs in sports history. What if Shane McMahon bought the UFC? What if Dana White never was able to purchase the UFC? Would the UFC be at the heights and the levels that it's at today? We'll never know. But Vince never believed in Shane to buy it because it's a real sport. And Vince only believed in the entertainment value, an entertainment standpoint. I just feel so bad for Shane because he was never believed by his father, in my perspective. But the crazy storyline also was you seen that Vince made Trish Stratus in the past get on her hands and knees, bark like a dog, stripping in her bra and lingerie in the middle of the ring, and that led to Sable suing the company for $110 million, but then returned to work with the company once again. Crazy stuff. And I also touched up on how Vince bought out Ted Turner and ended the Monday Night War and purchasing WCW. And also I touched up on Vince McMahon starting the XFL League, which failed in a year due to the fact that it was not entertaining. And it was supposed to be a football standpoint, not an entertaining standpoint value. So I thought that was crazy too. Honestly, it was crazy to see that in this documentary as well, Stone Cold Steve Austin was fed up with the booking of how the company was going in. From his perspective, he felt like creative got lazy now that there was no more competition, which led to Stone Cold Steve Austin being unhappy. Injuries got the best of him as well, but he ended up departing from the company in 2003. They lost The Rock to Hollywood, and in 2004, they were without the big names of Stone Cold, The Rock, Goldberg, and Brock Lesnar. So that's pretty wild to think about, and that's how the Ruthless Aggression era began, because you had guys like John Cena, Batista, Randy Orton, Eddie Guerrero, Kurt Angle all step up to keep this company relevant. So I thought that was pretty cool that the company they touched up on this in this documentary. Now, episode 6 showed that Vince McMahon was truly getting fed up with his character. You can see he was getting bored. The ongoing feud between himself and Donald Trump, the hair versus hair feud at WrestleMania 23 with Vince shaving his head, you could tell he was just getting bored. And he didn't have really much to do as a TV character because his wrestling mate, I should say the person that he had the best chemistry with, Stone Cold Steve Austin, was no longer part of the company. So Vince, in 2007, won the ECW title, had the limo scene with him faking his death. I thought that was pretty damn good as a kid in 2007. The edit was spectacular. You had people checking up on Vince. Was he actually alive? And the company on their website was reporting that Vince died. They had the 10 Ring Bell tribute on SmackDown that following Friday. But it all came to a halt because of the real life things that happened with Chris Benoit and his family's death that the WWE was trying to explore and learn more, just like the world was. And that broke Vince of his character in 2007 of faking his death. Now, I also like the fact that they touched up on wrestlers dying at a young age, before 45 years of age, dying to steroids, dying to drugs, and it's facts. I mean, it's unfortunate how these wrestlers in the past died, and that brought up the wellness policy in wrestling, which is a big thing for testing for steroids. And I'm pretty happy they actually covered Chris Benoit's death, because I wanted to hear more about it, and they tapped into wrestlers suffering from brain damage, from wrestlers taking bumps and concussions, suffering from CTE, which led to Chris Benoit's death and the disgusting actions that he did to his family and to himself before. Anyway, let's move on from that. But it also touched up on The Undertaker losing his streak with Vince wanting to put over Brock Lesnar at the last second. I thought that was pretty bizarre. But towards the end, it touched up on Booker T saying Vince will never retire. He will only leave the company if a bombshell happens. Well, in 2022, the bombshell happened. With all the sexual allegations of Vince McMahon's name in the dirt, with him having affairs with women, paying them millions in hush money to be quiet, the secret was out. And Vince had to retire, which led to the company in this end today. But I'll end it with this. Vince McMahon is the best wrestling promoter in wrestling history. One of the smartest businessmen in wrestling history. Because Vince has been dominant from the 80s all the way to the early 2020s. And his mark of keeping this so relevant and having this company being at the billion-dollar peak that it's at. He's helped it stay relevant from transitioning from star to star of Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold, The Rock, Cena, Taker, you name it. He kept the company afloat. He kept it relevant and kept it getting to higher and higher peaks and higher levels over the years. Something that his competitors like WCW, ECW, TNA, AEW can only dream of. So I give Vince a lot of credit for keeping this company fresh. At times it was aggravating to watch, but nobody could do it the way how Vince did it for all those years. Is he the best person on the planet? Hell no. But you got to give him his credit for being at the peak of what he's done for so long and keeping the company relevant for as long as he did. So I'll leave it at that. That's my thoughts on the documentary. That's all the time I have for you guys today. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. This is your host, Thomas Tyree, signing off. And I'll see you guys on next week's episode.